It is the Son, God, who shines graciously on you. The name Mishael means one who is God-like. We have a similar name in English, Michael. Michael's name denoted one who has patience and kindness and love in a godlike way. Nebuchadnezzar changed Mishael's name to Meshach, meaning the servant of the goddess of Sheba. Every name change Nebuchadnezzar made represented a change of focus from the God of heaven to a focus on a pagan god of Babylon. He changed Azariah's name to Abednego, meaning the servant of the god Nebo. Azariah means the Lord is my helper. Nebuchadnezzar was saying the Lord is no longer your helper. You are a captive in Babylon. You will never see your mother or father again. Your God cannot help you. You are to serve the Babylonian gods now. Resisting the pressure to conform. Can you imagine what life was like for Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah during those early days in Babylon? Torn from their homes in Judah, they were confused and perplexed regarding why God had allowed the pagan Babylonians to defeat their city and carry them off to a strange foreign land. They were just teenagers facing incredible pressures to conform to the materialistic, sex-centered, morally jaded, thrill-seeking society all around them. All they had to do was to go along with the king's program, and a rich, secure future lay ahead. It would be so easy to resist. It would be so easy. To resist would be so difficult. Why do you think did God begin Daniel's book with a story and not a prophecy? God knows that at the time of the end, the days in which we live, society will attempt to brainwash his people, just as the king of Babylon tried to brainwash Daniel and his friends. God doesn't start out this book with some spectacular prophecy that predicts events in the future. He starts out telling the story of a young man and his friends who are far from home. 4 young men whose hearts are not in the society in which they find themselves physically. 4 young men in a foreign country. 4 young men who are under unbelievable pressure to go along with evil. Some young people today say, it's impossible to really be Christian and serve God because everybody in my high school is having premarital sex. Everybody in my high school is involved in drugs. Everybody in my high school is going to parties and drinking alcohol. It's impossible to serve God in this kind of environment. Daniel and his friends could have said the same thing, but they didn't. Some men say, I work in a very rough factory where everyone curses and swears, and everybody tells off-color jokes. In the environment I work in, it is impossible to serve God. Some businessmen say, look, you can't serve God and be completely honest. If you are going to get ahead in business, you have to cut corners here and there. Daniel and his friends could have said the same thing, but they didn't. The battle for your mind. God begins the book of Daniel with the story of a young man in a corrupt, godless society whose mind could easily have been shaped by that society. In fact, this young man was under almost incomprehensible pressure to conform to the pressures of Babylon. In Daniel 1:8, but Daniel 1:8 says, Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's delicacies, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the chief of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. Daniel purposed in his heart. What does that mean? It means that Daniel decided. It means that he determined. It means that he chose. Daniel decided in his heart. He determined in his heart. He chose in the inner recesses of his heart. In the Bible, In the Bible, particularly in the Old Testament, the heart is used in a special way to refer to the seat of both the intellect and the emotions. It is the center of the thought process. Proverbs 4:23 says, "Keep your heart with all diligence." Proverbs 23:7 says, "As a person thinks in his heart, so is he." The book of Daniel begins with the story of a young man who makes a settled choice in the depths of his mind and emotions that he will not defile himself by conforming to the evil around him, and does so because the real battle at the time of the end and the last days of Earth's history is not some battle in the Middle East. The real battle just before Jesus returns and the battle for your mind. The devil will do everything he can through this godless secular society to influence your thought process, because the mind is the seat of your thoughts and emotions. Satan was there in Babylon doing everything he possibly could to influence Daniel's mind and emotions through the enticements of the pagan culture around him. But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself. The story in Daniel chapter 1 illustrates how God would have us react to the culture in which we live. Like Daniel, we need to purpose in our hearts that we will follow God's way, not the world's way. In these remaining days of Earth's history, before Jesus returns, it's important that we determine that by His grace we will remain faithful to Him and to His will for our lives. The power to choose. You see, we are not merely highly evolved animals. We can choose. We can exercise our power to make decisions about how we will live. And if we ask Him, God will help us to carry out those decisions. The will of the governing power in our human nature that brings all other faculties under its sway. Human beings are different from the animal creation. For example, some years ago, scientists at one of the great East Coast universities were conducting experiments with monkeys. They noted that there was an area in their brains that controlled pleasure. So these scientists connected an electrode to this pleasure center deep within the monkey's brain. Monkeys operate on a physical, biological level, not on the human level of reason or choice. The scientists rigged up a button that could be pushed, and every time that button was pushed, an electrical stimulation went into the area of the monkey's brain that controlled pleasure. It gave the monkey a sense of feeling really happy. They put the monkey in a cage with the button to see how strong the desire would be for the monkey to experience pleasure. It wasn't long until the monkey figured out the relationship of the button to that happy feeling. It began pushing the button repeatedly. They put a female monkey in the cage with him. He didn't even look at her. He just kept pressing the button. They put food in the cage, but he was more interested in the button. Nothing they did could distract him from the button and the pleasure it provided. That's what the devil tries to do with us. He tries to keep us so focused on the pleasures and attractions of this world that we will have little interest in the world to come. But human beings are not monkeys. Neither are we evolved monkeys. However, there are some people who act as that monkey did. They keep returning to the things that bring them temporary, fleeting pleasures. These things may be destroying their lives even here on earth, but they continue pressing the pleasure button again and again. God blesses Daniel's faithfulness. All the pleasures of the most powerful kingdom on earth at the time lay within Daniel's grasp. They were his for the taking. But verse 8 says he made a decision. He decided not to defile himself with the king's food and drink. Furthermore, he decided to give God an opportunity to show his power. Daniel purposed to Daniel proposed a test. Daniel said to the steward, whom the chief of the eunuchs had set over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, "Please test your servants for 10 days, and let them give us vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then let our appearance be examined before you, and the appearance of the young men who eat at the portion of the king's delicacies, as you see fit. So deal with your servants." One reason Daniel decided he would not eat the king's food and drink his wine, One reason Daniel decided he would not eat the king's food and drink his wine was that it was rich, unhealthful food, much of which was unclean according to the regulations God had laid down for Israel. But even more important, Daniel knew this food had been offered to the idols of the Babylonian gods before it was served to the royal household. To eat this food was to participate in the ceremony of idolatry. Daniel would not eat food that had been offered to idols. Doing so would be acknowledging the deity of these pagan gods. It would be repudiating the God of heaven. When Daniel purposed in his heart to serve God, God purposed in his heart to bless Daniel. What was the result of this 10-day test? At the end of 10 days, their features appeared better and fatter in flesh than all the young men who ate the portion of the king's delicacies. Thus the steward took away their portion of delicacies and the wine that they were to drink, and gave them vegetables. As for these 4 young men, God gave them knowledge and skill in all literature and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. Now at the end of the days, when the king had said that they should be brought in, the chief of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. Then the king interviewed them, and among them all none was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore they served before the king, and in all matters of wisdom and understanding about which the king examined them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers who were in all his realm. God blessed Daniel's faithfulness with health and wisdom, as the king examined the captives he had brought from his conquest of Jerusalem. Daniel and his friends, who had remained faithful to God, stood out in stark contrast to the young men who had compromised their principles by eating the king's idolatrous food. God will bless you as he did Daniel. During the 3 years of training, the steward took away their portion of delicacies and the wine that they were to drink. When a person decides to remain faithful to what he or she knows is right, there will always be things that will be taken away. But God will replace them with things that are better. He will pour out his blessings, pressed down, shaken together, and running over. Luke 6:38. Unless you allow God to take away the things that separate you from him, you cannot receive the rich blessings he has in store for you. There are 3 steps to receiving God's blessings in your life, as did Daniel and his friends. First, determine to please God, like Daniel purposed in your heart to do nothing that you consciously know displeases God. Second, allow God to take away the obstacles. When God puts his finger on some sin in your life, no matter how much you cherish that thing, no matter how much pleasure it gives you to push that button, recognize that God knows how to please you even more than you know how to please yourself. If you do that, you will be much happier in life. Allow God to take away any obstacles in your life and open your heart to receive his rich blessings. Third, rely on God's power and grace to enable you to follow through on the decision you have made to be faithful to him. It's true that we are weak and that in our own strength we often are unable to do the things we know we should, the things we want to do. Even the great Apostle Paul had this problem. He says, "The good that I will to do, I do not do, but the evil I will to do, that I practice." Romans 7:19. We can all identify with Paul on that. What is the answer? The apostle goes on to say, "O wretched man that I am, who will deliver me? I thank God through Jesus Christ our Lord." When we purpose in our heart to be faithful to God, He will help us. He will give us the power to resist temptation and do what is right. God triumphs over evil. Daniel chapter 1 begins with a great defeat from the true God. God's city Jerusalem is in ruins. God's man Daniel and his friends are in captivity. Evil seems to have triumphed over good. But when we come to the end of this first chapter, Daniel and his friends have triumphed over the temptations of Babylon. They have stood up faithfully for the God of heaven, and God has demonstrated His power in their lives. None was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore they served before the king, and in all matters of wisdom and understanding, about which the king examined them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers who were in all his realm. Daniel graduated with his PhD from the University of Babylon, untarnished. God's man stood as a stalwart witness of honesty and integrity. Tucked away in the last verse of chapter 1 are words that are filled with meaning. Thus Daniel continued until the first year of King Cyrus. Kings rise and fall, empires rise and fall. Babylon was the dominant world empire from 605 to 539 BC. Nebuchadnezzar was followed on the throne by his son and grandson, but the Bible says that Daniel continued from the kingdom of Babylon to the kingdom of Media-Persia. Through all the long years of his life, Daniel served God. Like Daniel, there are men and women in our world today who have one overriding desire in life, a passion in their hearts to serve God. And like Daniel, they will continue. The Babylons of this world will collapse like a deck of cards. The cheap tinsel of secularism and godlessness is soon to crumble like a sandcastle before the waves. But there is a new king coming. God's men and God's women who purpose in their hearts to serve Him will pass from one kingdom to the next and live forever and ever and ever. That's the message that Daniel chapter 1 has for us today. God will bless those who purpose in their hearts to remain faithful to Him, and they will live with Him forever. That concludes chapter 1 of Understanding Daniel and Revelation. I think I'm just going to do a chapter a week. So next week I'll do chapter 2. If you have any questions or prayer requests, please leave them in the comments. And I hope you enjoyed this Bible study of Understanding Daniel and Revelation by Mark Finley. Thanks.